The kitchen fires had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls as Zara Shadowfang pressed her back against the cold larder door. One hand splayed protectively across her still flat belly. The castle healer's words echoed through her mind like a death knell, each syllable carving itself into her consciousness with brutal clarity. Born under the blood moon, a child of legendary power. Her fingers trembled against the rough fabric of her servant's dress, and she could feel the rapid flutter of her pulse at the base of her throat. 3 years she had survived in the Frostborn castle by being invisible, by keeping her head down and her secrets buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot the crescent-shaped birthmark hidden beneath the waistband of her undergarments. 3 years of scrubbing pots until her hands cracked and bled, of sleeping in a narrow cot in the servants' quarters, of pretending she was nothing more than what they saw, a nameless, forgettable kitchen maid with no past and no future worth mentioning. And now this impossible, terrifying truth growing inside her. She couldn't remember the night it happened. Not really. Fragments surfaced sometimes in her dreams, the bitter taste of wine that had been too sweet, the spinning sensation of a room tilting sideways, hands that grabbed at her before something inside her had snarled and the world went white. She always woke from those dreams gasping, her skin crawling with phantom touches she couldn't quite recall. For months she had convinced herself they were just nightmares, just the echoes of a mind damaged by grief and loss and years of barely surviving. But nightmares didn't leave you carrying a child. How? The question had haunted her since the healer had pressed cool fingers to her wrist, since the old woman's eyes had widened with something that looked terrifyingly close to awe. Who? The larder door was cold against her spine, and Zara closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. She needed to think. She needed to plan. The healer had been sworn to secrecy. The old wolf had taken one look at Zara's terrified face and promised on her ancestors that she would tell no one. But secrets in a castle had a way of spreading like wildfire. Servants talked, guards listened. And if word reached the wrong ears, Lucian. Just thinking his name sent ice cascading down her spine. Her brother. Her betrayer. The man who had smiled at her across the dinner table 3 years ago before guards had stormed their family home, before she had watched her mother fall with an arrow in her throat, before everything she had known had burned to ash and ruin. She had been 16 years old, still gangly and uncertain, and Lucian had been 23, her brilliant, charming older brother who had always seemed to know exactly what to do. She hadn't understood, not at first. Not when the guards had dragged her away from her mother's body. Not when she had been stripped of her fine clothes and dressed in servant's rags. Not even when Lucian had appeared at the doorway of her new prison, his face arranged in an expression of such convincing grief that she had actually reached for him, desperate for comfort. "I'm so sorry, little sister," he had said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "But this is how it has to be. You understand, don't you? The Shadowfang line must end for the new age to begin. Mother and father were too powerful, too dangerous. But you—" He had cupped her face in his hands, and she remembered the cold touch of his fingers, so different from the warmth she had always associated with family. "You were always the weak one, the one without power. So I convinced them to let you live, as long as you stay hidden, stay forgotten. Be grateful, Zara. I saved your life." She hadn't understood then. She did now. Lucian had orchestrated everything. The massacre of their parents, the destruction of the Shadowfang court, the carefully constructed story that painted him as the sole survivor of a tragic attack by rogue wolves. He had risen through the ashes of their family's destruction to become a trusted advisor to the Alpha King himself, and no one knew, no one suspected, that the blood on his hands belonged to his own kin. And he had kept her alive for a reason. She knew that now with terrible certainty, the knowledge settling into her bones like frost. The Shadowfang bloodline carried ancient magic, power that had been dormant in her since birth, but never truly gone. Lucian's own magic was borrowed, stolen, woven together from artifacts and rituals that required constant maintenance, power that frayed a little more each year, that demanded ever darker sacrifices to sustain. He needed a permanent source, and the only way to claim true Shadowfang power was through the Blood Moon ritual. Blood moons were as predictable as eclipses to anyone who studied the old calendars, and Lucian had been studying them for years, waiting for the alignment that would fall exactly 9 months after the winter solstice, the night he had drugged her. But hers? Hers was born in the blood, sleeping but eternal, passed down through generations of queens and princesses who had ruled the silver throne. And now, it will pass to my child. The thought made her knees weak, and she pressed harder against the larder door, fighting the urge to slide down to the floor and curl into a ball. A child born under the blood moon, the healer had whispered, carrying Shadowfang royal blood. Such a child would be legendary. Such a child would be powerful beyond measure. Such a child would be exactly what Lucian needed. The door to the kitchen banged open, and Zara's heart stopped. "Find her!" The voice was sharp, authoritative, and horrifyingly familiar. One of the kitchen girls overheard the healer muttering about a blood moon child. Word reached Lord Lucian within the hour. The girl is pregnant, and he wants her found before dawn. No. The word was a scream inside her skull, but Zara clamped her hand over her mouth to keep any sound from escaping. No, 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 not now, not yet, I'm not ready. Footsteps thundered through the kitchen, and she heard the crash of pots being overturned, the scrape of furniture being shoved aside. There were at least 4 of them, maybe more, and they were thorough, methodical. They would find her in minutes. She had to run. The thought crystallized in her mind with sudden, desperate clarity. She couldn't hide, couldn't fight, couldn't hope that Lucian would show her the same false mercy he had 3 years ago. He had kept her alive because she was useful, a vessel for power he intended to harvest. But now that power was growing inside her, taking shape in the form of an innocent child, and Lucian would stop at nothing to claim it. I have to run. I have to protect my baby. The realization unlocked something inside her, some primal force that had been sleeping alongside her dormant magic. Not quite her wolf. She had never shifted, never felt the animal consciousness that other wolves described, but something fierce and protective nonetheless. A mother's instinct, perhaps. Or maybe just the desperate will to survive that had kept her breathing through 3 years of servitude and silence. There was a small window at the back of the larder, barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through. Zara had noticed it months ago, had idly catalogued it as a possible escape route if things ever became truly desperate. She had never imagined she would actually need it. She moved without thinking. Years of training her body to be silent and unobtrusive, finally serving a purpose beyond mere survival. Her fingers found the latch in the darkness, and she bit back a cry as the rusted metal scraped her palm. Blood, warm and wet, trickled down her wrist, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The window groaned as she forced it open, the sound impossibly loud in the confined space. Zara froze, her breath catching in her throat, but the guards were making too much noise in the main kitchen to hear. She had seconds, maybe less, before they thought to check the larder. She pulled herself up onto the narrow ledge, her shoulders scraping against the rough stone as she wriggled through the opening. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp and smelling of pine and distant snow. The Frostborn castle sat high in the mountains, and even in summer the nights carried the bite of winter. Zara tumbled out onto the frozen ground, her thin servant's dress offering no protection against the cold. She had no coat, no supplies, no plan beyond the simple imperative to run. Behind her, she heard a shout. They had found the open window, found the blood she had left on the latch, and then the baying of wolves shifting to give chase. She ran. The forest swallowed her whole, dark branches reaching out like grasping fingers as she plunged blindly into the undergrowth. Roots caught at her feet and thorns tore at her skin, but she didn't slow. Couldn't slow. Not with the sounds of pursuit growing closer behind her. Her lungs burned with effort, and a stitch blazed in her side, but still she ran. One hand pressed protectively against her belly as if she could shield her unborn child from the nightmare closing in. Please, she prayed to whatever gods might be listening. Please, let us survive this. Please let me keep my baby safe. The ground sloped sharply downward, and Zara lost her footing, tumbling head over heels through a thick carpet of dead leaves. She landed hard at the bottom of a ravine, the impact driving the breath from her lungs in a painful whoosh. For a long moment she could only lie there, gasping and trembling, her entire body screaming with pain. But the wolves were still coming. She could hear them crashing through the underbrush above, their growls and snarls echoing through the night like a promise of violence. She had to move. She had to keep going. Zara dragged herself upright, swaying on unsteady legs. The ravine carved a path through the forest, a natural corridor that might lead her deeper into the mountains or might lead her to a dead end. She had no way of knowing, no map, no guide, nothing but the desperate instinct to put as much distance as possible between herself and the monsters hunting her. She chose a direction and stumbled forward, one agonizing step at a time. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time had lost all meaning in the endless darkness of the forest. The sounds of pursuit had faded some time ago, but Zara didn't dare stop, didn't dare rest. Driven by a terror so profound it had become almost numbing. Her feet were bloody and raw, her dress torn to ribbons, and the cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she had stopped shivering, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a very bad sign. Just a little further, she told herself, the words becoming a mantra, a prayer. Just a little further and you'll be safe. She didn't know where safety lay or if it existed at all. She only knew that she couldn't stop, couldn't give up, couldn't let Lucian win. For herself, and for the tiny life growing inside her, she had to keep moving. The forest ended without warning, trees giving way to a vast open meadow bathed in pale moonlight. Zara stumbled to a halt, her exhausted mind struggling to process what she was seeing. In the distance, rising from the meadow like a monument carved from ice and stone, stood a castle unlike any she had ever seen. Its towers stretched toward the star-scattered sky, and torches burned along its walls, casting pools of warm golden light across the snow-dusted ground. The Frostborn Alpha's personal stronghold, she realized with a jolt of something that might have been hope or might have been despair. She had heard stories about this place, whispered tales shared among the servants about the ancient fortress where the Alpha King retreated when he tired of court politics. It was said to be impregnable, guarded by warriors who had served the Frostborn line for generations. It was also deep within Lucian's sphere of influence. The Alpha King trusted him. Everyone trusted him, the charming, grieving survivor of the Shadowfang massacre. But what choice did she have? Zara took a step forward, then another, her legs threatening to buckle with every movement. The castle seemed impossibly far away, a mirage shimmering at the edge of her failing vision. She was going to collapse before she reached it. She was going to die here in this frozen meadow, and her child would die with her, and Lucian would win. No. The word was a snarl inside her head, fierce and defiant. No, I won't let him win. I won't. Her legs gave out. She hit the snow hard, the cold burning against her cheek like fire. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and she could feel herself slipping away, consciousness fading like a candle guttering in the wind. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her was the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, and a voice, deep, commanding, and edged with something that sounded almost like shock, calling out orders she was too far gone to understand. Please, she thought, the word floating up from somewhere deep inside her. Please keep my baby safe. And then there was nothing at all. Awareness returned slowly in fragments. Warmth. First. Blessed, beautiful warmth, seeping into frozen limbs that had forgotten what it felt like not to ache with cold. The crackle of a fire, and the soft rustle of sheets that smelled of pine and wood smoke. And something else. Something deeper that made her wolf stir for the first time in years. Wolf. The thought surfaced through layers of exhaustion, carrying with it a pulse of startled awareness. Her wolf, the animal consciousness that had been silent since childhood, dormant and unreachable no matter how desperately she had tried to connect with it. For 3 years she had convinced herself she was defective, broken, a wolf who would never shift because whatever magic should have awakened that part of her had simply failed. But now she could feel it. A presence at the back of her mind, still distant and half asleep, but undeniably there. Undeniably real. What changed? Her hand moved without conscious thought, sliding across the soft sheets to rest against her belly. The baby. Of course. Whatever power lay dormant in her blood had begun to stir when she conceived, and the danger had finally shocked it fully awake. You're safe. The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and resonant, and carrying an authority that made her wolf sit up and take notice. Zara's eyes flew open, her heart hammering against her ribs as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. She was lying in an enormous bed, covered by layers of furs that held the lingering heat of a fire blazing merrily in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The room around her was lavishly appointed, all dark wood and rich tapestries, but it wasn't the luxury that captured her attention. It was the man standing by the window. He was massive, easily the largest wolf she had ever seen, his broad shoulders blocking out the pale gray light of dawn. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, shot through with strands of silver that caught the firelight, and his face, hard, angular, beautiful in a way that was almost savage, was set in an expression of intense concentration as he studied her. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. They were pale silver, almost colorless, and they held a weight that spoke of centuries rather than decades. The Alpha King, she realized with a jolt of pure terror. Gods above, I'm in the Alpha King's private chambers. She should run, she should beg for mercy. She should do something, anything, other than lie here frozen like a rabbit before a wolf. Instead, she met his gaze, and the world tilted sideways. Warmth exploded through her chest, golden and fierce and utterly foreign. Her wolf surged forward with a howl of recognition, and for a single crystalline moment Zara could feel everything. The steady thunder of his heartbeat, the sharp intake of his breath, the way his silver eyes flooded with brilliant burning amber. Mate, her wolf whispered, the word filled with wonder and longing and a terrible, desperate need. Across the room, the Alpha King, Xavier Frostborn, 600 years old and feared throughout the realm, went absolutely still. His eyes blazed gold, his lips parted, and a sound emerged from his throat that was more animal than human. A growl. Low and possessive, and filled with a hunger that made her blood catch fire. Mate, he breathed, the word reverent and stunned, and Zara felt the foundation of everything she thought she knew crack and crumble beneath the weight of that single, impossible syllable. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, heavy with the weight of centuries, and the impossible recognition that had just shattered everything Zara thought she understood about her own existence. She could feel her wolf pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness, straining toward him with a desperation that bordered on painful, and every instinct she possessed screamed at her to go to him, to close the distance between them and bury herself in his arms. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the Alpha King as the bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. This can't be happening, she thought wildly, her fingers clutching the furs that covered her with enough force to make her knuckles ache. This can't be real. I'm a kitchen maid. I'm pregnant with another man's child. You're terrified. His voice cut through her spiraling panic, low and rough, and threaded with what she could only call pain. Xavier Frostborn hadn't moved from his position by the window, but his eyes, still blazing that impossible gold, tracked her every breath, her every tremor, with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. I can smell it on you, he continued, and the words were gentle in a way that seemed completely at odds with his massive, predatory frame. Fear, exhaustion, blood. His jaw tightened, and she watched a muscle jump beneath the hard line of his cheek. You've been running from something. From someone. Zara's throat worked, but no sound emerged. The bond was doing something to her. She realized dimly, flooding her senses with awareness of him in ways that went far beyond the merely physical. She could feel his confusion like a tangible weight, could sense the centuries of loneliness that lay beneath his carefully controlled exterior, could almost taste the fierce, protective rage that was building in him as he cataloged the evidence of her suffering. He feels it too, she understood with a jolt. The bond. He feels what I'm feeling. The thought should have terrified her even more. Instead, it loosened something in her chest, some knot of tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Because if he could feel her fear, then he could also feel the truth of her, the desperation, the innocence, the burning need to protect the life growing inside her at any cost. She couldn't lie to him. The bond wouldn't let her. Yes, she whispered, and her voice came out raw and broken, scraped thin by hours of running and years of hiding. I've been running. Xavier's eyes flared brighter, and she watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, the tendons standing out beneath skin that was darker than she'd expected, weathered by centuries of sun and wind and war. He was fighting himself, she realized, fighting the instinct that was screaming at him to cross the room and claim her, to mark her, to make her his in every way that mattered. The knowledge should have sent her scrambling for the door. Instead, warmth pooled in her belly. Warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the impossible connection thrumming between them. What is wrong with me? Who? The word was barely human, more growl than speech, and Xavier took a single step forward before stopping himself with visible effort. Who dares hunt you? The raw possession in those 3 words sent a shiver cascading down her spine, and her wolf howled with approval, with longing, with a desperate need to submit to this male who had recognized her, claimed her, chosen her. But she couldn't tell him the truth. If she revealed Lucian's treachery, if she exposed her brother as the architect of her family's destruction and the monster who had kept her enslaved for 3 years, it would mean revealing her own identity. The crescent birthmark hidden beneath the waistband of her ruined dress, the Shadowfang blood that ran through her veins, dormant but potent. The child she carried, born of a night she couldn't remember but carrying power that could reshape the realm. I can't, she heard herself say, and the words felt like broken glass in her throat. Please, I can't. Can't or won't? The question was sharp, but not cruel, and when Zara met his eyes again, she saw something there that made her heart stutter. Patience, understanding, a willingness to wait that seemed utterly foreign to a male who could demand anything he wanted and have it delivered without question. I don't know you, she said, and the honesty of it surprised her. I don't know if I can trust you. Something flickered across his face. Pain, she thought, or maybe recognition, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable despite his massive frame and ancient power. No, he said quietly. You don't. He turned back to the window, presenting her with the broad expanse of his back, and Zara found herself staring at the play of muscle beneath his simple shirt, at the way his shoulders rose and fell with each controlled breath. The bond protested the distance between them, a physical ache that throbbed beneath her breastbone, and she had to bite her lip to keep from calling him back. You were found in the meadow, he said after a long moment, his voice carefully neutral. Half frozen, barely breathing, covered in blood that was mostly your own. My guards brought you here because I ordered them to bring any injured wolves to the castle for healing. He paused, and she watched his reflection in the dark glass of the window, saw the way his jaw tightened before he continued. I was in the great hall when they carried you through. I didn't see your face. You were wrapped in a guard's cloak, unconscious. But I caught your scent. And I... Another pause, longer this time. I haven't felt anything in 600 years. Not joy, not sorrow, not anger. The curse of an alpha who lives too long and loses too much. But when I smelled you, when I followed that scent to this room and saw you lying in my bed like you belonged there. He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes nearly undid her. Everything came back. Every feeling I thought I'd lost. Every hope I'd abandoned centuries ago. You woke me up, little wolf. You brought me back to life. Tears burned at the backs of her eyes, and Zara pressed her hand harder against her belly, against the small life that complicated everything. She wanted to tell him, wanted to confess every dark secret she carried and let him shoulder the burden with her. But fear still clutched at her throat, and the memory of Lucian's false kindness, his charming smile as he condemned her to servitude, made trust feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. I'm pregnant. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, brutal and blunt, and carrying all the terror she'd been drowning in since the healer's revelation. She watched his face for the disgust, the rejection, the cold withdrawal that she knew must come. It never did. Xavier's eyes dropped to where her hand rested against her belly, and she saw his nostrils flare as he drew in a deep breath, scenting the truth of her words. Something dark passed through his gaze. Rage, she thought, though not directed at her. And when he spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. Who is the father? I don't know. The admission burned like acid, and Zara felt hot tears spill down her cheeks despite her desperate attempts to hold them back. I don't remember. There was a night. Wine that tasted wrong, and I woke up alone and I didn't know. I still don't. She was sobbing now. Great, ugly gasps that shook her whole body, and she didn't hear him move, but suddenly he was there, kneeling beside the bed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. Shh, he murmured, and his voice was impossibly gentle, utterly at odds with the terrible fury she could feel burning through the bond. Easy, little wolf, you're safe now. No one will hurt you here. He didn't touch her. Some part of her noticed that, even through the storm of her weeping, he kept his hands carefully at his sides, giving her space, letting her choose. The restraint must have cost him dearly. She could feel the bond straining between them, demanding contact, demanding completion, and she knew he felt it too. But he didn't take, didn't demand, didn't use the vulnerability of her tears to press his advantage. He just waited, patient and steady as the mountains themselves, while she fell apart. I'm sorry, she finally managed, scrubbing at her cheeks with the back of her hand. I shouldn't. Stop. The command was soft but absolute, and Zara found herself obeying automatically, her wolf responding to the authority in his tone with instinctive submission. You have nothing to apologize for. Someone hurt you. violated you, and you survived. You protected your pup. That takes strength. He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, and she found herself mourning the loss of his closeness despite the danger of it. You need rest, he said, and though his eyes still burned with that terrible golden light, his voice was carefully controlled. The castle healer will attend you when you wake. Until then, sleep. You're safe within these walls. He moved toward the door, and panic clawed at Zara's throat before she could stop it. Wait, she heard herself say. Please, where are you going? Xavier paused with his hand on the door handle, and when he looked back at her, his expression was unreadable. I have questions, he said. Many questions. But you're exhausted and frightened and carrying a child, and I won't interrogate you while you're in such a state. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. My wolf is not pleased with this decision. He wants to climb into that bed with you and never let you go. But I am not my wolf, and you deserve better than an alpha who can't control himself. He opened the door and cold air rushed in from the corridor beyond. I'll post guards outside. No one will disturb you. When you're ready to talk, truly ready, I'll be waiting. And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and Zara was left alone with the crackling fire and the impossible truth of what had just happened. Mate, her wolf whispered again, mournful and longing. Zara pressed her face into the pillow that smelled of pine and wood smoke and him, and let the tears come. She didn't know how long she slept. Hours, perhaps, or only minutes. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, time stretching and compressing in ways that made her uncertain of anything except the persistent ache of the bond pulsing beneath her breastbone and the small flutter of life in her womb that reminded her why she had to keep fighting. When consciousness finally claimed her again, it was to the sound of hushed voices outside her door. Absolutely ridiculous. A pregnant servant? The Alpha King has lost his mind. Keep your voice down. If he hears you. He's in the council chamber. Has been for hours. Do you know what they're saying? He ordered them to investigate every male wolf in the castle. Anyone who might have been in the servants' quarters during the last full moon. He's going to find whoever touched her and... She's a maid, Marcus. A nobody. Why would the king care who... Because she's his mate, you fool. The words hit Zara like a physical blow, and she found herself sitting up before she'd consciously decided to move. Her body protested, muscles screaming, head swimming, but she forced herself to focus on the voices outside, straining to catch every word. His mate? That's impossible. The Alpha King doesn't have a mate. He's 600 years old. If he had a fated mate, he would have found her centuries ago. Well, apparently fate had other plans. Lord Commander says he's never seen anything like it. The king went into her room last night and came out looking like he'd been hit by lightning. His eyes were gold for hours, and he's been pacing like a caged animal ever since, snarling at anyone who gets too close. But the pregnancy? Doesn't matter. The voice was firm now, hushed with unmistakable awe. You didn't see his face when he talked about it. He said... A pause, and Zara heard the sharp intake of breath. He said the child would be raised as his, blood or not. He said any wolf who questioned it would be challenging his claim, and we all know what happens to wolves who challenge the Alpha King. Silence fell outside the door, heavy and significant, and Zara pressed her hand to her mouth to muffle the sound of her breathing. He said the child would be raised as his. The words echoed through her mind, impossible and terrifying and desperately, achingly hopeful. She had expected rejection, had braced herself for it, for the cold dismissal that must surely come when a king discovered his fated mate was carrying another male's child. She had imagined the curl of his lip, the ice in his silver eyes, the way he would order her from his presence and pretend the bond had never existed. Instead, he had claimed her child as his own. Why? The question circled through her thoughts like a hungry wolf. Why would he do that? He doesn't know me. Doesn't know anything about me except that I'm broken and frightened and carrying proof of another male's violation. Why would he? The door swung open, and Zara's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't Xavier who stood in the doorway. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with iron gray hair swept back from a face that had been beautiful once and was now simply commanding. She wore the robes of a healer, but her bearing spoke of authority that went far beyond medicine. "You're awake," the woman observed, stepping into the room and closing the door firmly behind her. "Good. The king will be pleased." Zara found her voice with effort. "Who are you?" "Helena Frostborn." The woman moved to the fire, adding another log with practiced efficiency. "The Alpha King's grandmother, if you must know, and the only healer he trusts to examine his mate without supervision." Grandmother. Zara's mind spun, trying to reconcile the information. If Xavier was 600 years old, then this woman. "I'm over 900, Helena said, as if reading her thoughts. "Healers age differently. Our magic sustains us, for better or worse. Xavier's mother had no such gift. She was a warrior queen, and she died as one, defending the northern border 4 centuries ago." The grief in her voice was old but unhealed. "But yes, before you ask, I've seen many strange things in my long life. I've never, however, seen my grandson act the way he acted last night." She turned to face Zara, and her eyes, the same pale silver as Xavier's, held a weight of knowledge that was almost overwhelming. "He loves you already. It shouldn't be possible. Mate bonds take time to develop usually. Days, weeks, months before the full force of them takes hold. But what I saw in his eyes last night, that was a bond that had already rooted itself in his soul." Zara's throat tightened. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." Helena moved closer, settling herself in a chair beside the bed with a grace that belied her apparent age. "But I know my grandson. I raised him after his parents died, watched him grow into the king he is today. And I watched him shut down, year by year, as the loneliness ate away at everything that made him him." She leaned forward, and her gaze was piercing. "You brought him back, child. Whatever power you carry, whatever secrets you're hiding, and don't bother denying it, I can see them in your eyes. You gave him hope for the first time in centuries. That's not something I'll forget." The words hit Zara like a wave, and she felt tears threatening again despite her best efforts to hold them back. "I don't deserve nonsense." Helena's voice was brisk, but not unkind. "Fate doesn't make mistakes. If you're Xavier's mate, then you're exactly what he needs, whether you believe it or not." She rose to her feet, smoothing her robes. "Now, I need to examine you. The child you're carrying. There's something unusual about it. Something that made my grandson's wolf go absolutely mad with protective instinct. May I?" Zara hesitated, her hand once again finding its way to her belly. She thought of the healer in the castle below, the one who had whispered about blood moons and legendary power. She thought of Lucian, hunting her even now, desperate to reclaim what he believed was his. She thought of Xavier, kneeling beside her bed while she wept, patient and gentle, and refusing to take what the bond screamed was his right. "Yes," she whispered. "You may." Helena's examination was thorough but gentle, her cool fingers pressing against Zara's belly while she murmured words in a language Zara didn't recognize. The old healer's expression grew more and more focused, her silver eyes taking on an almost luminous quality, until finally she drew back and let out a long, slow breath. "Well," she said, and her voice was very carefully controlled. "That explains quite a lot." "What?" Zara's heart was pounding, fear clawing at her chest. "Is something wrong with the baby? The child is fine, healthy and strong and growing faster than any pup I've seen in 9 centuries. The magic in its blood is accelerating everything, as if the child is in a rush to be born. Helena paused, her brow furrowing. Though, that's strange. The child's magical signature. It doesn't match what I'd expect from a forced conception. There's a resonance to it, a harmony, as if the child was conceived in love, not violence. I can't explain it yet. She shook her head, setting the mystery aside for the moment. But the power that child carries, it's ancient. Far older than this pack. Older than any pack I've ever encountered. It's... She stopped, seeming to choose her words with extreme care. When is the last time you looked at the birthmark on your hip? Zara's world tilted sideways. How do you know about... I'm old, child, not blind, and I've seen that marking before, in tapestries and ancient texts that most wolves believe are nothing but legend. Helena rose to her feet, and her expression was grave. The crescent moon of the Shadowfang royal house, the mark of the silver throne. The room seemed to shrink around Zara, the walls pressing in as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had been so careful for so long, hiding the truth of what she was, burying her identity beneath layers of servitude and silence. And now this woman, this stranger, had uncovered everything with a single examination. Please, she heard herself beg, please don't tell anyone. If Lucian finds out I'm here. Lucian? Helena's voice sharpened. Lucian Starfall? The Alpha King's advisor? Zara's silence was answer enough. Helena stared at her for a long moment, something dark and calculating moving behind her ancient eyes. Then she moved to the door, opened it, and spoke quietly to the guards outside. Zara couldn't hear what she said, but when she turned back into the room, her expression had shifted into something that looked almost like satisfaction. The king is on his way, she announced, and when he arrives, you're going to tell him everything, the truth about who you are, about what that child carries, about the monster who calls himself the Alpha King's trusted advisor. She settled back into her chair, and her smile was sharp as a blade. My grandson has been looking for a reason to destroy Lucian Starfall for decades. I believe you're about to give him one. The doors opened before Helena's words had fully settled into the air, and Xavier strode into the room with a presence that made the very atmosphere thicken. His golden eyes found Zara immediately, sweeping over her form as if checking for injuries, for distress, for any sign that something had changed since he'd left her in his grandmother's care. Whatever he saw in her face made him stop short, his jaw tightening. Grandmother. His voice was controlled, but Zara could hear the edge beneath it. You said it was urgent. It is. Helena rose from her chair, moving toward her grandson with a grace that belied her centuries. Close the door. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Xavier's gaze flickered between them, and Zara watched his nostrils flare slightly as he caught the shift in her scent. The fear, the panic, the desperate hope that warred beneath her skin. He moved without conscious thought, positioning himself between her and the door, his body a wall of protection even when he didn't know what he was protecting her from. Tell me, he commanded. Helena looked at Zara, one silver eyebrow raised in silent question. Permission. She was asking permission, giving Zara the choice even now, even when she could have simply revealed everything herself. Zara's throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. She thought of 3 years of silence, of hiding, of making herself small and invisible so that she might survive another day. She thought of Lucian's cold eyes and colder hands, of the night she couldn't remember, and the child she now carried because of it. She thought of her family's blood staining the floors of their ancestral home, of running through smoke and flame with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a birthmark she'd been trained since childhood to hide. And she thought of Xavier, kneeling beside her bed in the darkness, offering her safety when he could have demanded submission, guarding her through the night when he could have taken what the bond between them screamed was his, speaking to her with gentleness when the world had taught her to expect nothing but cruelty. "My name," she said, and her voice cracked on the words, "is not Zara the kitchen maid." Xavier went very still. Not the stillness of anger, but the stillness of a predator who has just caught an unexpected scent. Alert, focused, waiting. "My name is Zara Shadowfang. I am the last surviving member of the Shadowfang royal house. And the man who murdered my family, who sold me into slavery, who drugged me and used me to conceive the child I now carry." She had to stop, had to drag in a breath that felt like swallowing fire. "Is your most trusted advisor. Lucian Starfall is my brother." The silence that followed was absolute. Xavier's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, something ancient and dangerous rising to the surface. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low it was barely more than a growl. "Tell me everything." And Zara did. She told him about her childhood in the Shadowfang stronghold, about the ancient magic that ran through her bloodline like silver fire. She told him about her mother's lessons, whispered in the dark, how to hide her birthmark, how to suppress her power, how to survive if everything fell apart. She told him about the night the assassins came, about watching her parents die while Lucian stood in the doorway and smiled, about realizing, in that moment of horror, that her own brother had orchestrated it all. She told him about the drugs that kept her memory hazy, about being sold to a merchant who shipped her to Frostborn lands, about 3 years of servitude, of keeping her head down and her mouth shut, of surviving on scraps and shadows while she waited for Lucian to forget she existed. "He didn't forget," she whispered. "He was waiting. Waiting for me to be useful." Xavier's hands had clenched into fists at his sides, the tendons standing out like cords of steel. The child. The blood moon. Zara's hand found her belly, cradling the life within. "There's an ancient ritual. Lucian learned it from texts he stole from our family's archives. If a child with Shadowfang blood is born under a blood moon, and the right words are spoken at the moment of birth..." She couldn't finish. Couldn't force the words past the horror that clogged her throat. Helena spoke for her, her voice grim. "The power transfers. The child's magic. The mother's life force. It all flows to the one who performs the ritual. Lucian didn't just want to destroy the Shadowfang line. He wanted to become it." Xavier made a sound that was barely human, a snarl of such fury that Zara flinched despite herself. He was across the room in an instant, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the way his eyes had shifted from gold to something that blazed like molten amber. "He touched you," Xavier growled, and the words were rough with barely leashed violence. "He drugged you, violated you, put his child in your belly." "Not his child." Helena's voice cut through like a blade. "That's what I discovered during my examination. The magic that child carries. It's not Lucian's. It never was." She moved closer, her silver eyes intent on Zara's face. "Did you ever wonder why you couldn't remember that night? Why your memories of it are nothing but fog and half-images?" Zara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "I thought..." "The drugs. The drugs suppressed your consciousness, yes. But your wolf? Your wolf woke for the first time that night." Helena reached out, touching Zara's cheek with cool, gentle fingers. "Lucian drugged you and arranged for one of his men to force a conception. But your wolf rose before it could happen. She didn't fight. She was too weak for that, too long dormant. Instead, she did something far more cunning. She deepened the drug's hold on you, pulling you so far under that your body went completely still, completely unresponsive. And she flooded you with a scent, distress pheromones so overpowering that the man couldn't perform what he'd been sent to do." Helena's expression softened. He left believing he had succeeded. The drugs ensured you wouldn't remember enough to contradict that. But the assault never reached completion, child. Your wolf made sure of that. And then she sealed away the memories to protect your mind. Xavier's voice was barely controlled. Then how is she pregnant? Because the bond was already there, waiting. Helena turned to look at her grandson, and her eyes were bright with certainty. When Zara's wolf woke to protect her, she touched the mate bond for the first time, the connection that existed between Zara and her true mate, even though they had never met. The Shadowfang magic responded. The child was conceived not through any physical act, but through the bond itself, through magic older than any of us. She paused. I've read of this in the oldest texts. When a Shadowfang woman's life is threatened and her mate bond exists, the magic can create life to preserve the bloodline. It's happened perhaps 3 times in recorded history. The words hung in the air, impossible and undeniable. Zara felt them sink into her bones, felt something inside her shift and settle at the revelation. The child she carried, the life she had believed was born of violation, had never been touched by Lucian's scheme at all. The bond she felt to Xavier, the connection that had sparked to life the moment their eyes met, it had existed long before that moment, had reached across time and space to protect her when she needed it most. Xavier's hand reached out, hovering over her belly as if asking permission, and when she nodded, trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks, he pressed his palm against the curve of her stomach with a reverence that made her heart crack open. She could feel his wolf through the bond, could feel it keening with a joy so fierce it bordered on grief, the sound of something broken finally being made whole. Our child, he said, and his voice cracked on the second word. Our pup. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and she saw centuries of loneliness and ice beginning to thaw behind that amber gaze. My mate. Xavier. Zara's voice was barely a whisper, but he heard her. He would always hear her. Lucian will come for me. When he realizes where I am, what I know, let him come. Xavier's smile was sharp as a blade, cold as the winter that had ruled his heart for 600 years. Let him walk into my territory, into my castle, and try to take what's mine. I have been searching for a reason to tear him apart for decades. He leaned closer, his forehead pressing against hers, and his voice dropped to a rumble that she felt in her very bones. Now I have 3. Helena cleared her throat delicately. As touching as this moment is, we have rather more pressing concerns. Lucian has been Xavier's advisor for nearly a century. He has allies in the court, spies in the guard, influence that reaches into every corner of this castle. If we move against him openly without proof, then we get proof. Xavier straightened, but his hand remained on Zara's belly, as if he couldn't bear to break the contact. Grandmother, I need you to search the archives. Everything we have on the Shadowfang massacre. Every report Lucian filed about that night. There will be inconsistencies. There always are, when someone tries to hide this large a crime. Helena nodded, already moving toward the door. I'll also send word to the northern packs. The Shadowfangs had allies among the mountain clans. If any of them survived, they might be willing to testify. And Zara? Xavier's voice softened as he looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes. What do you need? What would make you feel safe? She thought about it, really thought, pushing past the fear and the exhaustion and the overwhelming strangeness of everything that had happened in the past day. And what she realized surprised her. I need to see him, she said quietly. Lucian. I need to see his face when he realizes I'm not hiding anymore, when he understands that his scheme has already failed. Xavier's expression flickered with concern. Zara, I'm not asking to face him alone. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a steadiness she didn't quite feel but was determined to project. I'm asking to stand beside you when you destroy him. I've spent 3 years running, 3 years being afraid, 3 years letting him control my life from the shadows. Her hand found his where it rested on her belly, and she laced their fingers together. I want to watch him burn. Something fierce and proud blazed to life in Xavier's eyes. Then you'll have a front row seat, he promised. But first, we prepare. We gather evidence, build alliances, make sure that when we strike, there's nowhere for him to run. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her skin tingle with warmth. And we keep you safe, both of you. The days that followed were unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. She was moved from the tower chamber to Xavier's own suite, a sprawling set of rooms that overlooked the castle's inner courtyard and filled with afternoon light that made the ice-blue hangings glow like captured sky. He slept on a chaise near the fireplace, giving her the enormous bed that smelled of him, of pine and winter and something that made her wolf purr with contentment. He was careful with her, so achingly, devastatingly careful that it made her want to weep. He never touched her without permission, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. When nightmares woke her in the darkness, and they did, every night, dreams of blood and fire and Lucian's cold smile, Xavier was there before she could even cry out, pulling her against his chest and murmuring soothing words until the terror faded. You don't have to do this, she told him one morning, when dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. They were sitting on the balcony, wrapped in furs against the morning chill, and she could feel the heat of him through the layers of fabric. Stay with me every night, I mean. You must have duties, responsibilities. Nothing more important than this. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than upending his entire schedule to watch over a servant girl he'd known for less than a week. The council can wait. The court can wait. You cannot. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it, carrying all the confusion and wonder and disbelief she'd been trying so hard to suppress. I'm nobody. A kitchen maid, a runaway, a woman carrying a child conceived under the worst possible circumstances. Why do you look at me like I'm something precious? Xavier turned to face her, and the dawn light caught his features in a way that made him look almost otherworldly, all sharp angles and golden eyes and a beauty that was more wild than refined. Do you feel this? He asked, pressing his hand to the center of his chest. This warmth, this pull, this sense that something has slotted into place that was missing before? She did. Goddess help her? She did. It was there every time she looked at him, every time he touched her, every time she caught his scent on the wind. A rightness, a recognition, a feeling that she had spent her entire life searching for something she hadn't known she was missing, and had finally, impossibly, found it. That's the mate bond, Xavier continued, and his voice was soft now, intimate, meant only for her. It's rare among our kind, true mates, fated pairs, the stuff of legends and ancient songs. Most wolves go their entire lives without experiencing it. I've lived for 600 years, Zara. 600 years of cold and darkness and feeling nothing, wanting nothing, believing myself incapable of the warmth that other wolves took for granted. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. And then I caught your scent in a corridor, and everything changed. Zara's breath caught in her throat. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. Of wanting this, of believing in it. Every time I've let myself hope for something, it's been taken away. I know. Xavier didn't try to argue with her, didn't try to convince her that this time would be different. Instead, He simply opened his arms in silent invitation, letting her choose whether to accept. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she was in his embrace, her face pressed against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat, a rhythm that seemed to sync with her own, two hearts learning to beat as one. His arms came around her, careful of her belly, and she felt something ancient and instinctual settle inside her. Her wolf, stirring awake after years of dormancy, recognized what her conscious mind was still struggling to accept. Here. Stay. His. I don't expect you to trust me yet, Xavier murmured against her hair. I don't expect you to feel what I feel, to want what I want. But I'm asking you to give me time, to let me prove that I'll never hurt you, never betray you, never let anyone take you from me. His arms tightened fractionally. Can you do that, little mate? Can you give me a chance? Zara pulled back just enough to look up at him, and what she saw in his face, the vulnerability beneath the strength, the hope beneath the centuries of ice, made her heart ache in a way that was almost unbearable. Yes, she breathed. I can try. His smile was like watching the sun break through storm clouds, brilliant and warm and transformative in a way that made her breath catch. That's all I ask. But their fragile peace was not to last. It happened 3 days later, during a dinner that Xavier had insisted she attend. He wanted the court to see her, he said. Wanted them to know that she was under his protection, that any move against her would be considered an attack on the Alpha King himself. Zara had dressed carefully in a gown of deep blue velvet that Helena had provided, one cut to accommodate her growing belly while still maintaining an elegant silhouette. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that covered the back of her neck, an old habit, hiding the places where a mate's mark might one day rest, and she wore no jewelry except for a simple pendant that Xavier had pressed into her hands that morning. It was my mother's, he'd told her, clasping the delicate silver chain around her neck. The last Luna Queen of the Frostborn pack. I think she would have liked you. Now, sitting at Xavier's right hand at the high table, Zara could feel the weight of 100 stares pressing against her skin. The court was assembled in all its glittering glory, nobles in silks and furs, warriors in polished leather, advisors in robes of state. And among them, seated at the far end of the table where the lesser advisors were positioned, was Lucian Starfall. He looked exactly as she remembered. Handsome in a cold, calculated way, with their mother's dark hair and their father's sharp cheekbones. His smile was pleasant, his manner charming, and absolutely nothing in his demeanor suggested that he was a murderer, a manipulator, a monster wearing the skin of a man. But his eyes, those pale, colorless eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years, those eyes found her across the crowded hall and went wide with recognition. Then they narrowed with something far more dangerous than surprise, calculation, fury. And beneath it all, the cold, careful planning of a predator who had just spotted his escaped prey. Zara's hand found Xavier's under the table, gripping hard enough that her knuckles went white. He didn't look at her, didn't give any sign that anything was amiss, but his thumb traced soothing circles on her wrist even as he raised a goblet to his lips. Breathe, he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. He can't touch you here, not surrounded by my wolves, in the heart of my stronghold. But even as he spoke, Zara watched Lucian's expression shift into a smile that chilled her to the bone. A smile that said he had already begun to plan, already started to scheme, already found a way to turn this unexpected development to his advantage. The game had begun, and Zara had the terrible feeling that her brother was still several moves ahead. But Xavier and Helena were playing their own game, and they had centuries of experience that Lucian lacked. Over the weeks that followed, Helena unearthed damning inconsistencies in Lucian's original report of the Shadowfang massacre. Dates that didn't align, witness accounts that had been altered, a guard captain's testimony that contradicted the official record in 3 separate places. Xavier dispatched trusted riders to the northern mountain clans, and 2 of them returned with elderly wolves who remembered the Shadowfang court, who wept when they saw the crescent birthmark on Zara's hip and knelt before her, as though she were a ghost made flesh. The evidence mounted quietly, carefully, each piece locked away in Helena's private vault, where Lucian's spies could not reach it. Meanwhile, Zara played her own part, attending court functions on Xavier's arm, letting Lucian see her, letting him believe she was nothing more than a frightened girl clinging to a powerful protector. She watched her brother smile and scheme across crowded halls, and she smiled back, and the effort of it nearly broke her. But it was working. Lucian grew bolder, more careless, convinced that Zara was too weak and too afraid to be a threat. He didn't notice the net closing around him. And perhaps it was the growing confidence, the sense that she was no longer merely surviving but finally fighting back, that woke what had been sleeping in her blood. Because in the quiet hours between the scheming, Zara's magic began to surface in small, uncontrollable ways. Silver sparks danced across her fingertips when she was angry. The candles in her chamber flickered and flared when nightmares woke her. Once, when a courtier had cornered her in a hallway and whispered something vile, every torch in the corridor had exploded outward in a shower of molten wax. Helena had called it the awakening, and had begun teaching her the old Shadowfang breathing techniques she'd found in the archives, exercises to channel the power rather than simply survive it. The blood moon rose 3 weeks later, painting the sky in shades of crimson and shadow that seemed to pulse with ancient power. Zara stood at the window of Xavier's chambers, their chambers now, though she still sometimes woke in the night startled to find herself in such luxury, and watched the moon climb higher, her hand pressed against the swell of her belly where her child stirred restlessly. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, a crackling tension that made her skin prickle, and her dormant wolf pace anxiously in the back of her mind. The beast had grown stronger over the past weeks, awakened by the mate bond that hummed constantly between her and Xavier, but tonight it was practically clawing at her consciousness, desperate to break free. "Danger," it whispered. "Danger coming. Protect. Run. Fight." But there was nowhere to run, and Zara was done fleeing from shadows. The door burst open behind her, and she spun to find one of Xavier's guards, a young wolf named Wren, who had been assigned to her personal protection, stumbling through with blood streaming from a wound at his temple. "My lady," he gasped, catching himself against the doorframe. "You have to hide. The eastern wall has been breached. Starfall's forces. They're inside the castle." Zara's blood turned to ice. "Where is Xavier?" "Fighting at the main gates. He sent me to get you to safety, to the underground passages that lead." Wren's words cut off in a wet gurgle as a blade erupted from his chest. He looked down at the metal protruding from his body with an expression of confused betrayal, then crumpled to the ground, revealing the figure standing behind him. Lucian Starfall stepped over the body of the fallen guard as casually as if it were a discarded piece of furniture. His pale eyes gleamed in the crimson moonlight, and his smile was the same one she remembered from her nightmares, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of mercy. "Hello, little sister," he said, his voice soft and pleasant as he closed the distance between them. "Did you really think you could hide from me in the Wolf King's bed?" Zara backed away, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Stay away from me." "Oh, I don't think so." Lucian's smile widened as he advanced, and she could see now that his hands were stained with blood, not his own. "Do you have any idea how long I've been planning this? How many years I've spent positioning myself, waiting for the perfect moment?" He gestured at the blood-red moon visible through the window. "And here it is at last. The blood moon. The night when Shadowfang power reaches its peak." The night when that child inside you will be born screaming, and I will finally claim what should have been mine all along. You killed our family. She away, Zara said, her voice shaking with rage and grief and a hatred so pure it burned. Our parents, our brothers and sisters, everyone who ever loved us. They were weak. Lucian's lip curled in contempt, clinging to outdated traditions, refusing to see the potential of what we could become. The Shadowfang power could reshape the world, could bring kingdoms to their knees, and they wanted to use it for healing and protection. He spat the words like curses. I was the only one who understood, the only one willing to do what needed to be done. You're insane. I'm a visionary. He was close now, close enough that she could smell the blood on him, the dark magic that clung to his skin like a second shadow. And you, sweet sister, are the vessel that will carry my vision to fruition. That child you carry, conceived the night I drugged you and sent one of my wolves to breed you like livestock, will be born tonight. His smile was the coldest thing she had ever seen. And when it is, when the blood moon's power flows through its veins, I will perform the ritual that transfers all of it to me. His hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. You should be honored. Your sacrifice will make me a god. He doesn't know, Zara realized with a shock that cut through her terror. He still thinks the assault succeeded. He has no idea the child is Xavier's. Zara struggled against his grip, but pregnancy had weakened her body, and Lucian had always been physically stronger. He began dragging her toward the door, toward whatever nightmare he had prepared, and she felt terror clawing at her chest because Xavier was fighting at the gates, and Ren was dead, and there was no one coming to save her. A roar split the night. Not human, not entirely wolf. Something older and more primal, a sound that spoke of centuries of banked fury finally unleashed. Xavier came through the door like a force of nature, his eyes blazing amber gold, blood streaming from a dozen wounds that didn't seem to slow him at all. Get your hands off my mate, he snarled, and the words were barely intelligible through the fangs that had descended in his fury. Lucian shoved Zara aside, and she stumbled, catching herself against the bed frame as her brother drew a blade that seemed to drink in the moonlight, turning it dark and wrong. Alpha King, he said, his voice still pleasant despite the threat that faced him. I was hoping I'd have a chance to kill you myself. Your grandmother has been a thorn in my side for far too long. They clashed in a blur of steel and claws and magic that made the air crackle. Xavier was faster, stronger, driven by the protective fury of a mate defending his own. But Lucian had spent decades preparing for this night, and the dark artifacts he wore, rings and amulets and a circlet that pulsed with stolen power, gave him strength that should have been impossible for a wolf of his rank. Zara watched in horror as Xavier staggered, one of Lucian's spells catching him across the chest and leaving a wound that smoked with dark magic. He went to his knees, still fighting, still snarling defiance, but she could see him weakening with every passing moment. Did you really think you could stop me? Lucian circled his fallen opponent, savoring the moment. 600 years old, and you're still just a wolf, a beast. I am going to become something far greater. He raised his blade for the killing blow, and Zara made her choice. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't weigh the risks or consider the consequences. She simply moved, stepping over her mate's wounded body to place herself between him and her brother's descending blade. No. The word came out quiet, but something in her voice made Lucian pause. Made him look at her, really look at her, for the first time since he'd dragged her from their burning home all those years ago. Get out of the way, Zara. His voice had lost its pleasant veneer, revealing the cold rage beneath. You're nothing but a vessel, a means to an end. You have no power to stop me. You're wrong. And as she spoke the words, Zara felt something stir in her blood. Something old and vast and terribly powerful. something that had been sleeping since the night her family died, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to wake it. You forgot something, brother. You forgot who I am. She could feel it now, the Shadow Fang magic that had been her birthright, the legacy that Lucian had tried so desperately to steal. It rose through her like silver fire, igniting every nerve, every cell, every corner of her being with power that blazed brighter than the blood moon itself. And with it came her wolf, not a whisper this time, not a stirring, but a roar that shook her to the marrow. She felt her eyes flood silver, felt her nails lengthen into claws that gleamed like polished steel, felt her canines descend as her wolf surged to the surface and merged with her consciousness for the first time in her life. Not a full shift, something rarer, something the old texts called the war form, half woman, half beast, entirely Shadowfang. I am Zara Shadowfang. Her voice echoed with harmonics that weren't entirely human, layered with her wolf's snarl beneath every syllable, and silver flames began to dance along her skin, casting the room in brilliant, terrible light. Last princess of the silver throne, daughter of the moon and stars, and you will not touch my family. Lucian's face contorted with fury and fear, the first real fear she had ever seen from him. Impossible. The ritual should have drained your magic. You should be empty, broken, nothing. You forgot one thing about Shadowfang women. Zara advanced on him, and with every step, her power grew brighter, stronger, fueled by her love for her mate and her unborn child, and the fierce protective rage of a mother and mate who had finally stopped running. We don't break. She raised her hands, and the silver fire roared. We burn. The flames struck Lucian's dark artifacts first, shattering them one by one, the rings cracking and falling to ash, the amulets exploding in bursts of corrupted magic, the circlet melting from his brow with a scream of released power. He staggered back, suddenly diminished, suddenly mortal, suddenly nothing but a man facing the full fury of the legacy he had tried to steal. Wait, he gasped. And for the first time in her life, Zara heard her brother beg. Wait, please. I can explain. We could work together. You need me. I needed a family. Zara's voice was cold as the moon, inexorable as the tide. I needed someone to protect me, to love me, to help me understand what I was. And you took that from me. You took everything. You were nothing. Lucian's composure shattered completely, his face twisting into something ugly and desperate. A spare heir, a forgotten daughter, a vessel for power that should have been mine. You should have stayed forgotten in that kitchen, should have died with the rest of them. Should have what? Zara interrupted, her flames burning brighter. Should have given up? Should have let you win? She shook her head slowly, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every tear she had shed, every nightmare she had survived, every moment of fear and grief and pain that had led her to this blood-soaked room. I am done being afraid of you, Lucian. I am done letting you control my story. She struck him with the full force of her awakened magic. The silver fire engulfed him completely, burning away the darkness that had consumed his soul long before he ever raised a blade against their family. He screamed. Her name, their mother's name, curses and pleas that blurred together into incoherent agony. And then he was crumbling, dissolving, becoming nothing but ash that scattered on the wind that rushed through the broken windows. His last word was her name, stretched into a wail of defeat. And then, he was gone. Zara stood trembling in the aftermath, the silver flames slowly dying around her as the power retreated back to wherever it had been hiding all these years. She felt hollow, empty, like a vessel that had been filled past its capacity and was now slowly cracking around the edges. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. I have you, Xavier's voice rasped in her ear, and she realized he had risen despite his wounds, had dragged himself to her side the moment the battle ended. "I have you, little mate. You're safe now. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not quite. The blood moon had reached its peak while they fought, and now Zara felt something shift in her belly, a tightening, a pressure, a pain that cut through the exhaustion clouding her mind. She gasped, clutching at Xavier's arms, and felt wetness spreading between her thighs. "The baby," she managed. "The baby is coming." Everything after that happened in a blur. Helena arriving with healers, the battle outside winding down as Lucian's forces scattered without their leader, Xavier refusing to leave Zara's side, even as his own wounds were tended. Hours of labor, of pain that eclipsed everything she had ever experienced, of Xavier's hand gripping hers and his voice in her ear telling her she was strong, she was brave, she was everything he had ever wanted and more. And then, as the blood moon began to set and the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky, a cry split the air. Thin and wailing and perfect in its fury at being brought into such a chaotic world. "A girl," the healer announced, and Zara caught the tremor of relief in the woman's voice. The unspoken acknowledgement that a child born hours after its mother had channeled enough magic to incinerate a man should not, by any reasonable measure, be this perfect. But the healer placed the squirming bundle in Zara's exhausted arms and managed a shaky smile. "Healthy and strong, my lady, against all odds. A true daughter of both lines." Zara looked down at her daughter's face. So small, so perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the clouded blue of all newborns, but seemed to carry hints of silver in their depths, and felt something break open in her chest. Not painfully this time. Beautifully, like a flower blooming after a long winter, or the sun rising after an endless night. This was what she had been surviving for. This was why she had endured the horror and the grief and the years of servitude. This moment, this child, this future that had seemed impossible only weeks ago. Xavier leaned in, his forehead touching hers, and when she looked up, she saw the same wonder in his eyes that was filling her own heart to overflowing. "She's perfect," he breathed, "just like her mother." "She's ours," Zara whispered back, and the word, ours, felt like coming home. They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them cocooned in warmth and safety and love. But then Xavier's hand found her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze, and she saw something new in his expression, something hungry and desperate and infinitely tender all at once. "Zara," his voice was rough with emotion, I want—" He broke off, visibly struggling to find the right words. "The bond. It's been singing in my blood since the moment I first saw you, and tonight, watching you fight. Watching you claim your power and protect our family." He swallowed hard. "I need to make you mine, truly mine, in the way of our kind, with marks that will never fade, and a bond that death itself cannot break." He paused, concern flickering through the intensity. "But you just brought our daughter into the world. If you need time—" Her heart stuttered in her chest. She knew what he was asking, knew the significance of the marking bite, the ancient ritual that would bind them together for eternity. And part of her was still afraid, would always be afraid perhaps, of wanting something this much, when she had lost so much already. But a larger part of her, the part that had grown stronger with every day spent in Xavier's presence, knew that this was right. This was what she wanted, what she had been waiting for without even knowing it. "Yes," she breathed. "Please, make me yours." Xavier's eyes blazed amber gold, and the growl that rumbled from his chest was pure possessive satisfaction. He gestured to the healer, who quickly bundled the sleeping newborn into a nearby bassinet before discreetly withdrawing from the room. And then they were alone. Xavier moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Zara was done hesitating. She tilted her head to the side, baring the vulnerable curve of her neck in invitation, and felt his breath hitch at the submission implicit in the gesture. Mine, he growled, and then his mouth was on her skin, trailing kisses up the column of her throat, worshipping her with lips and tongue and the barest hint of teeth. She shivered beneath his touch, heat pooling low in her belly despite her exhaustion, and her hands came up to grip his shoulders as he settled over her. I've wanted this since the moment I caught your scent, he murmured against her pulse point, and she could feel his fangs lengthening, pressing gently against her skin. Wanted to mark you, claim you, make you mine in every way that matters. Wanted everyone who looked at you to know that you belong to me, and I belong to you. Then do it, she breathed. I'm ready. He struck. The pain was sharp and immediate, his fangs piercing the junction of her neck and shoulder with a precision born of instinct older than memory. She cried out, her fingers digging into his back, but even as the pain flared, something else was rising, a heat that spread from the bite like molten gold, transforming agony into pleasure so intense it bordered on unbearable. Through the newly forming bond, she felt him, not just his presence, but his essence. 6 centuries of empty rooms and unanswered howls, of watching every sunset alone and feeling nothing, 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 until the numbness became indistinguishable from death. She felt all of that loneliness shatter like ice in spring, felt the raw wound beneath it where a heart had kept beating only out of stubborn duty. And flooding into that wound now, warmth. Her warmth. The bond was showing her what she meant to him, not in words, but in the way his entire being had rearranged itself around her existence, the way his wolf had stopped its centuries-long pacing and simply lain down, trembling, at her feet. Mate. The bond sang between them. Mine, yours, ours, forever. And then, as the bite reached its peak and Xavier began to pull back, Zara acted on instinct she hadn't known she possessed. Her own wolf surged forward, and before she could think, before she could hesitate, she had pulled him down and sunk her teeth into the thick muscle where his neck met his shoulder. Xavier roared, in surprise, in pleasure, in fierce satisfaction at being marked in return. His blood filled her mouth, hot and rich and tasting of pine forests and winter storms, and through the bond she felt his shock giving way to overwhelming joy. In 600 years, no one had ever tried to claim him. No one had ever dared. Until her. She held on, letting the mark settle, feeling the bond complete itself in a rush of sensation so intense that the world went white around the edges. And when she finally released him, gasping for breath, she found him staring at her with an expression of such profound wonder that it made her heart ache. You marked me, he breathed. You're mine too, she answered, and was surprised to find that her voice was steady, strong, certain. Whatever this is between us, it goes both ways. I won't be a possession, Xavier. I won't be something you own. I am your partner, your equal, your mate, and I need you to be mine just as much as I am yours. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and then a smile spread across his face. Not the controlled expression of the Alpha King, but something younger and wilder and infinitely more precious. Yours, he agreed, and the word was a vow. Mate, forever. He gathered her in his arms, careful of her tender body and the fresh marks they both now wore, and held her against his chest. Through the bond, she could feel his heartbeat syncing with hers, 2 rhythms becoming one, and the peace that washed over her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Safe. Home. Complete. Their daughter stirred in her bassinet, making a soft sound of newborn distress, and Xavier rose to retrieve her, settling the tiny bundle between them with such infinite gentleness that Zara felt tears prick her eyes. "Rest now, my love," he murmured, pressing a kiss to Zara's forehead, then to their daughter's downy hair. "The kingdom can wait. Tonight, there is only this. Only us." And for the first time in her life, Zara let herself believe that happy endings were possible. The coronation took place 1 month later, on a day so bright and golden that it seemed the sun itself was celebrating. Zara stood beside Xavier on the dais of the great hall, dressed in robes of silver and white that marked her as both Luna Queen and the restored princess of the Shadowfang line, and watched as the nobles of the Frostborn kingdom knelt before them. Helena sat in a place of honor beside the throne, her sharp eyes bright with satisfaction as she watched her grandson present his mate to the court. The old wolf had spent the week since the battle systematically rooting out every trace of Lucian's influence, every traitor who had supported his schemes, every shadow that might threaten the new order. The kingdom was secure at last, truly secure, and the peace that had seemed impossible only months ago was finally within reach. Their daughter, named Seraphina for the silver fire that had greeted her birth, slept peacefully in Xavier's arms as he addressed the assembly. She had grown quickly in her first weeks of life, already showing signs of the power that both her bloodlines carried. The court mages whispered that she would be the most powerful wolf born in generations, a true heir to both the Frostborn and Shadowfang legacies. But to Zara, watching her mate cradle their child with such obvious love and pride, none of that mattered. What mattered was this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment that she had never dared to dream of during all those years of servitude and fear. "People of Frostborn," Xavier's voice rang out through the hall. "Today we celebrate not just a coronation, but a new beginning. For 6 centuries, I have ruled alone, believing that was my fate. But the moon had other plans." He turned to look at Zara, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. "She brought me my mate, my equal, my partner, my queen. And together, we will build a kingdom worthy of our daughter's inheritance." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Zara felt the last of her old fears melt away like snow in spring sunshine. This was her home now, her family, her future. And as Xavier's hand found hers, as the bond between them pulsed with warmth and love and unshakable belonging, Zara finally understood what it meant to be whole. She had been broken once, had been a vessel, a pawn, a forgotten princess in a kitchen that smelled of ash and old grease. She had carried scars both visible and hidden, had known grief and loss and the bitter taste of betrayal. But she had also found strength she never knew she possessed, had claimed her birthright, destroyed her enemy, and chosen love over fear. And in doing so, she had discovered that happy endings weren't given, they were fought for, bled for, chosen again and again in the face of every obstacle the world could throw at you. Outside the great hall, the sun shone bright on a kingdom at peace, and inside, surrounded by wolves who had become her pack, with her mate at her side and her daughter in his arms and a future that stretched before them like an endless golden dawn, Zara Shadowfang finally let herself believe in forever. It looked a lot like home.